Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
My name is Joe Good. I'm Shantanu Kupan.
My name is Peter.
Lee Robbins.
My name is Bill.
Roger.
Todd.
Peter.
Larry. My name is Paul Shepard.
Brian.
Jen.
My name is Jerry Jones.
I'm Tom Brown.
I am Dave Bingham. I'm Richard Azzolini.
My name is Ray Dyer.
I'm Grace Khan.
Steve Blumenthal.
I'm Jerry Gazair.
Jack Busby.
My name is Roy King.
Ed Brophy.
Ben Antonio.
Steve Jesters.
Mike.
I'm Anna.
My name is Michael. Paul. David Lewis.
My name is Jim.
I'm Kay Matsuda.
My name is Manuel.
Do we get everybody? Are there people who are here for the first time? If our regular people would try to make them feel welcome, that would be nice. So not only do we have a speaker today, but we have an introducer.
Our speaker today is William Schindler, and I've known William since 2003, so I guess we are old friends at this point. William is most recently the author of a book called UC Tantra. It's on spirituality and gay men's culture in the modern world, incorporating sexuality. And William is also the founder of a spiritual community in Los Angeles called Ashram West. It's a community in which William offers instruction in meditation and guidance in spiritual matters of all kinds. But the path by which William comes to this is probably, well, it is very intriguing. William grew up in a family in California that was involved with the Vedanta Society, Ramakrishna Mission, a 19th century Hindu reformist group, with which I grew up also. So William and I have debated and argued and clashed and lately concurred on the merits and such of Vedanta Society. William traveled to and lived in India for 2.5 years, from 1973 to 1975, first as a pilgrim and then as a student at Banaras Hindu University, where William studied Sanskrit and Hindi, and later on studied Sanskrit again at Berkeley, and William has taught and continues to teach Sanskrit at the Vedanta Society in Hollywood. In fact, I've been in one of your classes. So, without further ado, here's William Schindler.
Thank you. I'll open with a chant.
Om Hari Om. Om Bhadram Karnebhi Shrunuyama Devaah. Bhadram Pashye Makshabhirya Jatraah. Sthirairangai Stushtvagam Sastanobhi. Vyashema Devahitam Yadayuh. Om.
With our ears may we hear what is holy. With our eyes may we behold the holiness that is everywhere. Tranquil and firm in body and mind. May we lead our lives dedicated to the divine.
Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Since our time is fairly short, I'm going to suggest speaking a little bit about Gay Tantra and then opening up to any questions that you might have. If that's okay with you. Mm-hmm. Spiritual practices can be categorized in two broad categories. One is ascetic practices, and one is what I call ecstatic practices. Other people have called them integrative or I forget what the other term is, but ascetic practices are what we're most familiar with. Most of the gurus that come from India teach ascetic practices. Buddhism, by its very character, is ascetic. And what do I mean by ascetic? Ascetic I define as any practice that involves withdrawal of the senses, quieting of the senses, quieting of the mind, shutting down of the senses, an inward kind of focus. That in general is what asceticism does. It draws us within. Ascetic practices are popular because they work. The problem is that asceticism as a way of life, essentially a monastic way of life, isn't suitable for the vast majority of people as a lifelong way of life. And so when the ascetic opens his eyes, then what happens to his practice? If he's only practicing a spiritual practice when he's got his eyes closed in meditation, what does he do with his eyes open? So the tantras, and I can only really speak to Hindu Tantra because that's what I've studied, but I've heard that Buddhist Tantra shares this with this characteristic. Develops the other side as well, that ascetic practices are as if the in-breath of spiritual life, and then the ecstatic practices are the out-breath of spiritual life. So that together they make a whole life practice so that your spirituality doesn't end when you open your eyes and interact with the world. The trick is, the problem is, the challenge is that the senses are very engaging, and they create this appearance of a world and of individuals, some of whom are very attractive and draw us, and we want to be them, be with them, and possess them, and enjoy them in all kinds of ways. And that's just the nature of the way that we're constructed, as the Upanishad says, that the senses are made to go outward and to interact with the world. And ascetics shut down the senses precisely because they don't want that distraction. They see that as disturbing to the mind and as inimical to self-knowledge. But in the Tantric tradition, the senses are developed and trained to become allies in spiritual life. And the primary method for that is ritual. Now, traditional Hindu Tantric rituals are incredibly complicated and culture specific. But the basic principle of them is spiritualizing the whole of life by ritualizing the whole of life. So, and in Buddhist terminology, it's applying mindfulness. It's being mindful in action. What's particularly effective about Tantric ritual and the way it develops mindfulness is that it really breaks the process down into very tiny little steps that are doable. In Tantra, you're never asked to believe in anything other than what you experience. You're never asked to become something other than what you are. So you start in Tantra with wherever you are right now, which is really the only place you can start. The problem with some world religions is they'll say, well, we're going to tell you how to be. This is what you have to do, and this is how you have to behave to be all right in our book. Tantra says, you're pure and perfect exactly as you are. There's nothing lacking in your being at all. If there's anything lacking, it's just in your knowledge of your being. Your knowledge of your being is incomplete. So right now, who do you think you are? what do you think you are? Chances are, most of you sitting here, including myself, experience ourselves as a physical body. It's separate in time and space from other physical bodies, and we have a personality that's also different from other personalities, and we have a name that's different, and so on. All of these different characteristics, and Tantra says that's fine to give yourself that way, or that's true. That is your experience. Now, what else is there? Is that all there is? And through various steps takes you into ever more expansive experiences of self that ultimately becomes all-encompassing. Tantra is a non-dualistic system, meaning that there's only one existence, and that, but unlike other non-dualistic systems, say like Shankara Vedanta, which is ascetic in character, Tantra says, no, the material world is not unreal, it's not false. The material world is pretty much as we perceive it to be. It's real as far as it goes. It's just that it's not the whole story. That what the senses and mind tell us about the world and about ourselves isn't the whole story. There's more to us and to the world than what we perceive. Now, what about the gay part, the gay Tantra part? That's fine for sort of a quickie introduction to Tantra. My own experience and belief is that people who have developed well-integrated gay identities are kind of a little bit ahead of the game in terms of spirituality. Quite, in contradiction to many spiritual systems, it says, gayness is the antithesis of spirituality. I think just the opposite is true. And when I say a well-integrated gay identity, I mean gay people who experience and accept that within ourselves we combine characteristics that are both masculine and feminine, and that we understand that gender identity is a fluid thing, it's not something that's fixed. And that we understand that same-sex love is possible, and we experience that as a truth. Those things make us more godlike than people who are stuck in a gender-polarized identity, that I'm only this and not that, which is inimical to the experience of oneness. So we're already a step closer to oneness by integrating all of that, and that's something that gay people kind of do naturally as long as they're not all tied up in internalized homophobia. So gay Tantra one thing is to help people who are experiencing and suffering from internalized homophobia to shed that and to embrace the beauty of their gay beings and the greater wholeness of what gayness is. And you might say, well, what about straight people? Well, they can develop a gay consciousness, because the gayness, as I understand it, isn't about sex specifically. It's about a way of experiencing yourself in the world. So-called straight people can also experience themselves as combining masculine and feminine traits, and that they can also experience same-sex love as possible. So they're not excluded from gayness unless they exclude themselves from it. And I know I have some very good gay, straight friends who I consider honorary gay, or have developed gay consciousness, because they do embody these characteristics as well. So, one of the things that's, in terms of meditation, tantric meditations tend to start with a form, meditation on a archetypal form or a divine form, and some people have a problem with that, the whole concept of deity, or the concept of form, or God with form, or God at all. I mean, certainly Buddhism is atheistic, and as one particular orthodox school of Hinduism, the Sankhya philosophy, is also atheistic. So it isn't by any means necessary to believe in God or to meditate on any kind of form of God in order to have realization. But Tantra particularly chooses that because it happens to be a very natural way of entering spiritual life. As I discussed earlier, you have an attractive man, and your heart and your mind feels attracted to him. And in Tantra, you would take what is called the Ishta, or the desired one, as your object of meditation. And it might be a classic form like Shiva or Krishna or Ramakrishna or something, but it could also be customized to your own tastes and likes. The idea is to use your natural tendencies to help you develop spiritually rather than to oppose them as ascetic systems would. So an ascetic system says, if you want something, definitely don't go for that. Deny yourself that, because it's only going to get you tangled up in the world. In Tantra it says, no, understand that what you really are seeking is the divine that's being reflected through whatever seems to be attracting you. And go ahead, have the experience, have the love affair, have the whatever it is that you want, but stay aware, take the whole experience. Both the pleasant, the unpleasant, take it all in, realizing that behind the appearance there is that divine being, the Buddha nature, if you will, the Brahman as it's called, or Atman. And if you get into a more ritualized, that is, worship your lover, see him as the divine, and keep that mindfulness in your lovemaking and in your interactions with him, and then your relationship becomes actually a spiritual practice rather than a distraction. So, I think that's a good introduction. What questions do you have or comments? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about that idea of awareness? You were talking about seeing the lover or the love affair as an aspect of the divine.
Mm-hmm.
And that reminded me of the troubadours and courtly love, the same sort of idea that the object of affection is worshipped not because he or she is divine in themselves, but because they're a representation, an avatar almost. Well, that's become a dirty word, hasn't it? But anyway,
not in my mind.
The divine. But how do you actually enter into that situation? And I guess my background is more aesthetic. So when I think of maintaining awareness, I think of maintaining detachment.
Right.
And how do you enter into the relationship fully and see it as divine if the tool for keeping track of that divinity is not detachment? Where does the awareness, what does one use to keep that awareness?
Right, the mindfulness. Well, that's the trick. That's why even tantrics have as their basis an ascetic practice, a meditational practice. So they develop detachment. They develop more specifically the yogic ability to direct their attention at will. And that's an important foundation on which the ecstatic practice is built. If you do either one without the other, the ecstatic practice is like only breathing in. And if you do only the other, it's only breathing out. But neither one works. You really have to breathe in and out. So the way that the Tantra trains the senses is by kind of the crystallized form of Tantric ritual is a tiny little process which is entirely an internal visualization called Bhuta Shuddhi, or purification of the elements. And in that you focus on each of the senses separately and see them as tied to consciousness. When we talk about the divine, what we're talking about is, in Sanskrit, it's called chit, or consciousness. It's also called sat, being, and ananda, bliss. But we focus on chit because it's something that you experience. That when you have an experience, there's the content of the experience, which we call the content of consciousness, and then there's actually the awareness that has to be present for that to be aware of the content, right? So in the Bhuta Shuddhi, you practice becoming aware of content in the moment, whatever the particular sensory input is, whether it's smell, taste, sight, touch, hearing, memory, fantasy, and relate each of those experiences, real experiences in the moment, to the awareness, the pure awareness, the consciousness behind them. And by practicing that process of breaking down the illusion, as it were, of the world, the spinning circle that creates an illusion of self, and breaking it down into its points, you learn to see each sense experience as a manifestation of consciousness, that it can't exist unless consciousness is there. And so the shift is a shift in attention, a subtle shift, very subtle shift from the content of consciousness to identification of the pure consciousness. Yes?
I'm in another group, in a Buddhist book group, and I noticed Tom and Jerry, who are here also from it, and we're reading a book by Epstein, I never remember these names, from a perspective of Tantra as well as Buddhism, and he's a psychoanalyst and Indian and Ramayana and so forth, on desire. And a central theme of it, as I understand it, is about his terminology is object and subject. When I'm the subject, I have desires. And you, if you're in connection with me, are simply an object to fulfill my desires. And so, as I understand it, and he distinguishes those as masculine and feminine. Desires, the masculine and feminine, as more the subject, the object. And so he talks about shifting that so that you attend more to the other person in a relationship as subject to their desires, which seems to me to fit in with the idea of compassion from Buddhism. And I wondered if that might fit in with...
Well, Harry Hayes used to say that the essence of the gay consciousness is subject-subject consciousness rather than subject-object consciousness. You someone else where you had a hand up earlier. Yeah, yes.
So on that same topic, our book, Open to Desire, he talks about desire being sort of a chase. In other words, you're seeking something, and once you have it, you no longer have desire because you have it. So it's like a chase, and when you stop chasing, you stop having desire. So how do you deal with that, and how is that reflected in your practice?
What do we do with desire?
Yeah, I mean, in other words, you always want to be fueling or having and experiencing desire, because once you get it, do you have to have something else replace it?
Well,
you know what I mean?
What we see is that what we desire is the divine. It seems like what I desire is that handsome man, that shiny car, whatever. But what gives that handsome man or the shiny car a sense of reality that makes it attractive is the divine ground that is present there. So that's why when you get the desired thing, you find there is no there. If you're focusing just on the thing itself rather than as a thing, as a avatara, as a embodiment of the divine. So what we do with desire is intensify it and direct it toward that true goal through whatever it is that happens to be attracting us at the moment. Yeah.
Kundalini and Tantra are often intermingled. Can you talk a little bit about the purpose of Kundalini, how it fits into Tantra?
Yes, that Bhuta Shuddhi ritual I mentioned, one of the purposes of that ritual is to awaken Kundalini. Kundalini, within the Tantric terminology, are you familiar with the concept of Maya? No? Okay. I guess I can go there. Ascetic Hinduism, Shankara Vedanta as I call it, says that the one undivided infinite being, Brahman, appears as many and divided through something called Maya. Now, in the Shankara system, Maya is an impersonal thing, is actually related to the Sankhya concept of Prakriti. But because Shankara is non-dualistic rather than dualistic, he can't give Maya a separate existence. So he kind of does what I consider to be kind of an intellectual linguistic cheat. And he says, well, it's not real, but it's not unreal either. And if you ask me to describe what it is, I have to say it's indescribable. But it's a fact. The fact is there's one existence and it appears multiple. So in his system of things, because the phenomenal world is mithya or false, there's nothing to be had by interacting with the world, and therefore the only logical response to the phenomenal world is to renounce it. In Tantra, it's not like that. Tantra, Maya is personified as Maya Shakti, as consciousness, as the goddess, the great goddess, who out of her own being creates all forms, morphs herself into the forms of the phenomenal world for her own pleasure or play. And so Shakti, to get back to your Kundalini, is also called Kundalini. That's one manifestation of Shakti. Is within the physical body, what sustains us, prana and so on, are all manifestations of Kundalini. But Kundalini is considered to be sleeping or relatively inactive in most people. But when Kundalini is awakened through appropriate spiritual practices, then she desires to be united with Shiva. So Shiva is pure consciousness, thought in terms of the physical body to be present here. Kundalini sleeps in the base of the spine. And so she travels up the spine to unite with Shiva. And it's her passionate desire to be united and joined in a sexual union with Shiva that drives her up very dramatically. And as she goes up through the different chakras or systems, then you experience different states of consciousness. Is that what you wanted to know? And it's possible to become enlightened in Hindu tradition without even bothering with Kundalini. In some systems, you just practice detachment, and then you don't have to worry about Kundalini. But Tantra does focus on Kundalini, and specifically the practice of Bhuta-Shuddhi, which is designed to awaken that power. What else? Yes.
I'm still trying to understand why gay tantra, if it's non-dualistic.
Why gay?
Yeah, I mean the straight gay
I'm asking
dichotomy.
you.
It seems ultimately, that's
Yeah.
about form.
You can talk about the ultimate, but that's not it. What is your experience? Are you gay? Okay, that's why gay tantra. Because it exists. Because we experience ourselves as that. And that's where we have to start, what we have to deal with.
I just noticed when you talked about well-integrated gay people being closer to God.
Right. More God-like,
a certain
actually.
discomfort, because I think how do you discern between inflation, feeling like you're more special somehow? Because I think religion does that so much.
Sure.
Suddenly now we're the chosen people, and there are those people who are less godlike.
Yeah, well, one can appreciate the advantages of a gay identity without necessarily becoming arrogant about it. But there's always the razor's edge, as it were, the narrow path in a lot of different aspects. So, yeah, beware. Don't be arrogant, because we're not special. Nobody is. We're all the same. Yeah.
You never hear, I haven't heard people talk about being careful not meditate too much, or that meditation can be dangerous. But we hear people talk about Tantra as something you have to be careful with. It's like a light in the fire.
Yes.
And so it can be dangerous.
Yes, life can be dangerous. From an aesthetic point of view, yeah, you really are playing with fire. Whenever you are engaging the power of desire, especially sexual desire, that's strong stuff. Now, if you're not a spiritual aspirant, lots of people have sex all the time, and they survive just fine. So obviously, sex in itself isn't dangerous unless you're having unsafe sex. But spiritually, yeah, you're dealing with something that is can very easily eat you up, and distract you, and take away and steal away your mindfulness. Which is why rigorous training, first in a meditation practice, and then an incremental training in training the senses. You don't start with sexual ritual. That's like saying, I want to learn to play Chopin, and you don't even know what the notes on the piano board are. It's like, that's fine. It is definitely possible for people to learn to play Chopin who don't know any piano right now. You know that, right? But it requires a fair amount of practice and study and diligent practice and mistakes in order to get to that point. So sexual rituals like playing Chopin. You don't start with that. You might start with brushing your teeth or washing your hands, something a little bit less distracting. Yeah.
You know, one of the stumbling blocks I find with Tantrism as a framework for gay men, gay women.
It's the heterosexual imagery.
Yes, imagery. So the models and the paradigms are also strongly heterosexual. I mean, all you have to do is look at the art.
Yeah.
And Purusha is definitely the masculine energy. Prakriti is definitely feminine.
Yeah.
Shiva, Shakti. So this is, one of the stumbling blocks. The models are all straight, and here we are.
Here we are. Actually, biological gender is used as a metaphor in Tantra for one thing in two aspects. So human beings, whether male or female, are all human beings. In that sense, they're all one thing. But they have two aspects, a male aspect and a female aspect. And that's as far as that heterosexual imagery goes in usefulness. Mm-hmm. So there's one thing, consciousness, and it has two aspects, an observing aspect, which we call pure consciousness, and then there's a manifesting aspect, we call the content of consciousness. Shiva is the observing aspect. Shakti is the manifesting aspect. The image of Kali is of course like the quintessential tantric deity. How many are familiar with Kali? Well, some fair amount of you. Kali is a goddess, normally depicted with 4 arms, who stands on the body of Shiva, who lies as if dead or sleeping or unconscious or whatever at her feet. And in some images, she was just looking up at Kali, and Kali in her dancer pose with quite a lot of chaos going on around her. She's got a bloody sword in her upper left hand and a severed head in her lower right hand. And she's got one hand making a gesture like this, and another hand making a gesture like this. So Kali is the phenomenal world in all of its darkness and its light. She's got this blissful face, a third eye, which indicates that she's capable of granting enlightenment. The sword is the sword of knowledge, that when you cut through the illusion of separateness, which is represented by the severed head, you experience oneness. She, with this hand, she confers fearlessness, which only comes from not being identified solely with this physical body, but knowing yourself as the consciousness in all beings. And she grants everything, every desire, which also comes with knowing that you are the all. There is nothing that you are not, or that you lack. So she is this quintessential deity of enlightenment.
On that issue of male heterosexual paradigm,
sure.
I wonder if you feel comfortable telling some version of the story that you told mine.
The Rishi story.
Yes.
Well, even in Ramakrishna's life, you have Ramakrishna, he mentions the 19th century Bengali saint whom millions of people consider to be a saint of the highest order, or even an incarnation of God. Has anybody read any of Isherwood's stuff or know anything about Ramakrishna? Yeah. So Ramakrishna used to cross-dress with the help of his wife, with whom he never had sex, I might add. He used to cross-dress in two modes. One was using the whole Krishna-Radha paradigm. He would dress as Radha and approach Krishna, the divine, as his divine consort, lover, illicit lover, not husband or wife, but as illicit lover, which is considered to be a higher form of passion than marriage, interestingly enough, which is a lot gayer, I think. But don't get married. And the other mode in which she would cross-dress would be as the girlfriend of Kali. Yes.
Is there a practice to awaken Kundalini to which you could briefly introduce us?
No. Not briefly. That takes a little bit more knowledge. You just meditating or having devotion and expressing devotion can awaken Kundalini. But the specific technical way of awakening Kundalini in Tantra is technical. It's a little bit too much to go into in brief talk. But Shantanu was asked me to tell about, talked about Ramakrishna, but there was a man from Nepal who contacted me a few years ago. I was just telling the story last night, so his name is Rishi. And his story was that when he was a child of 6 or 7 years old, a Tantric holy man came to his village in Nepal and asked his parents, or told his parents rather, I want this boy. So they gave him to him, and he took him off into the jungles of Nepal to train him. And he told the boy right from the day one, you are to regard me as Krishna, and you will be Radha. And so he raised him up to have this feminine identity. Required him to, if he wore clothes at all, mostly he went naked, but when he would wear clothes, he had to wear clothing suggestive of a female dress. And there were more aspects to the training there, but the basic relationship was one of training him how to worship God as a woman, as a love, an all-consuming love experience with her husband or her lover.
What does that mean?
I'm sorry?
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
More.
Oh. How much detail to go into? It meant for him that he was to serve, or she was to serve Krishna in every way. Sexually too. Eventually, that not right away, not when he was still a little boy, but when he got older, then that became part of the relationship. But there are other aspects of the training that would remind us most of some aspects of slave training in the leather community. If you're familiar with any of that kind of master, dominant, submissive stuff, with extreme dominant, submissive training, but with a spiritual objective. Now, and this man, when I met him, was in his 50s. And the reason I was even able to meet him is because of a tragedy that happened in his village, that their fields were destroyed, and it would take years for them to build back up, and so they needed young men from the village or men from the village to go and earn money. And the village knew of some Nepali guy in Northern California who had a motel, and so they went to the holy man and said, "We need him back now." And the holy man said, "Okay, he's already fully trained. He's got nothing to fear." And they sent him to America to work in a motel. He approached me wanting me to sort of step in for his guru, which I couldn't do. I couldn't be that person for him. But I invited him to visit me and so on. One of the things that was noteworthy or about that visit was he said, I was trained that it's impolite to be dressed in the presence of a guru. So he asked if it was all right if he took off his clothes when he came to visit me. And I said, that's fine. Yeah, there's some aspects of tantric practice that, if you just think about the sexual thing, it's like, oh, that sounds like fun. But the same theory that operates in seeing the divine in a sexual act also teaches us to see the divine in things that are shocking and repulsive. So there are some sects of Tantra where the eating of human flesh is part of the ritual, to see even something as horrifying and disgusting as that. And as horrifying and disgusting as that is to us, it's actually about 100 times more horrifying and disgusting to Orthodox Hindus, who have a concept of spiritual purity that we don't even have any notion about.
Do you know anyone? Do you know any actual people who have done
Eaten human flesh?
Well, or shit, or whatever.
Well, Rishi had some war feces in order to overcome aversion to that. And they used to hang out with Aghoris, who are famous for eating human flesh. I don't think he actually did it.
What were the souls? Who were the victims?
Whose flesh were they eating?
Yeah, flesh eating.
Oh, there's plenty of dead people in South Asia. It's not like here where you have to really go out of your way to see. Death and life are very natural in the open there. So, no, there's no shortage of skulls or dead bodies. But it is a good question. Shoot. And also, that's one aspect of Tantra that many people find really, really disturbing and hard to wrap their minds around. And in that case, that kind of Tantra isn't for you. If you are so locked in a dualistic mode that you are averse to that, and that you can't even intellectually entertain the possibility that the divine is actually present in even horrible things and in violence, then you're not fit to practice it. Stay with your ascetic practice. Withdraw from the world.
It means either be a Catholic or an ascetic.
Yeah, well, that's a simplified view. But yeah, well, there are lower levels of Tantra where they focus, and in the beginning stages, you focus entirely on the pleasant, the beautiful aspects of the divine. You have a beautiful shrine, very much like this. You have flowers, incense, nice smelling perfumes. You do things that reflect basically the activities in daily life, getting up in the morning, bathing, washing, preparing food, eating. All those things are reflected in Tantric worship, the full form of the worship. So through that, kind of doing them in a ritual context, you learn to spiritualize those actions, and then you generalize that to life. So it isn't only when you offer food in the temple that the act of offering food or consuming food is holy, but also when you're offering food to your boyfriend. If you have the mindful awareness of that and you cultivate that. So yes, short of eating flesh, you can still practice Tantra, just not that more extreme form. And the extreme practices are tests of realization. Once you may feel like you experienced the one, all right, now eat shit. And if you can, without losing that awareness of the one, then that's a really strong message, like, wow, yeah, I didn't find that to be abhorrent at all. I found that to be as holy as eating the holy prasad from the temple. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit then about the training process? I mean, Buddhism now in the West is fueled in many ways by books and classes and seminars and things like that. But traditionally, it was a guru-disciple relationship, and to find a teacher who belonged to the lineage.
Right.
So now with Tantra, would it be the same thing? Would you have to find a master or a guru of some kind and train for a period of time, or how does one?
It's a real problem. They're just, well, let me put it this way. Tantra pervades modern Hinduism. Probably since the 5th century AD, Tantrism, in terms of ritual, if there was a Hindu ritual, it was a Tantric ritual. So all the temples in India where they do ritual worship every day is done according to the Tantras. So in that sense, it's everywhere. And a lot of gurus who may not know or think of themselves as Tantric gurus are actually teaching Tantric practices. That's certainly true of the Vedanta societies. And that's a whole interesting story there about how much awareness there is within that order of the Tantric roots. My experience from inside the order is that there are monks who know that very well, and there are other monks who don't. So, Tantra always had a tradition of secrecy, and you can kind of see why, I think, because some of the practices, if you're not fit for them, just seem like ugh. Sex with somebody who's not your wife or husband, that's wrong. Eating human flesh, that's wrong. So that mentality, there's no reason for a tantric to provoke other people, so they keep it secret. They only share that with someone who's really ready to learn it. You could say I violated that to some extent by sharing those details with you, but if you read the books, if you read Ramakrishna's life, he had to eat human flesh at one point. He actually hesitated, and his tantric guru, who was a woman, Bharati, said, "What? You've come so far and realized so much? Watch me, I'll do it." And so she takes a bite of his head or something. And he says, "Okay." So then he identifies with the goddess in her terrible aspect. Boom.
About 10 years ago, when I was in graduate school, I had there was a woman who actually lived in India and traveled with tantric, yogis, and what she said was that there was hardly anyone who knew the breathing or yogic exercises anymore. I mean, they had the memory of those exercises without knowing actually how to do them.
Well, I think there are people who do teach it, but there aren't a lot. Almost guaranteed, if somebody is advertising themselves as a tantric teacher, what they're teaching is what George Forrestine calls neo-tantra. Anything that's purely sexually focused or anything like that is not traditional tantra. It's stuff made up in the West, like Joseph Kramer, the body electric guy. Because I asked him about it, and he admitted very readily, no, this is not traditional tantra. I never studied traditional tantra. I just called my massage techniques that I developed myself tantra because some people experience this as spiritual, whatever that means. And he said he regrets now using the word tantra to describe body electric. But there is a huge body of, so-called tantra out there that creates an impression that tantra is all about massage or eroticism and so on, when actually that tantra is about spiritualizing the whole of existence, all kinds of experiences. And if sex is part of your existence, it teaches you how to spiritualize that too. but the focus is on enlightenment, not on sex. Yeah.
Almost always when I hear someone talk about this subject, it's about human beings. And I raise that because one of the great problems we have in the West is the divorce of what it means to be a human being from nature, which has been about for a lot of things probably located in religion. How does your practice lead to a notion of the indivisibility of the biosphere? And what does that mean when I walk outside and I see a tree or a weed, or what's my relationship?
Yeah, the Mahavakya, the great saying from the Veda that underlies Tantric practice is Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. All this is verily Brahman, all this is verily divine. So at that level, nature, humans, there isn't a division there. It's all one being. And Tantrics explicitly cultivate that awareness.
So having sex with a horse or a dog, that's an expression would be within the realm of Tantric expression, not just eating flesh, but anything in nature.
Yeah, to my knowledge, that has never been a part of Tantric practice. But theoretically, I guess it could be. It's not something I teach, huh? Yeah.
So, on that same concept, how would what would the view be of vegetarianism versus eating meat? Like, what role would vegetarianism play?
Yeah.
In Buddhism, it has, it's
right, ahimsa and all that stuff.
Yeah, there's a role.
Sure, and ahimsa is considered the supreme dharma in Tantra as well. And yet they also, Tantric rituals, some Tantric rituals, animal sacrifice is done even today. So, from a practical point of view, eat what keeps you healthy, energetic and healthy. And if you are moved to restrict your diet to a vegetarian diet, and that's where you're at, then do that.
I mean, what strikes me is, you mentioned, everything is just an expression of the one.
Right.
And so...
I would say just an expression,
well,
but it's pretty special.
Yeah. So if insects eat insects and frogs eat insects and birds eat frogs and then they get eaten, So,
yeah.
Maybe I'm not asking you, but it's curious that we view humans somewhere in that realm eating other creatures as being something to abstain from. The vegetarian view, and I just came off being vegetarian for 3 years. So
yeah, I spent a year as a vegetarian. I felt very holy. But I mean, just to read practically again, if I had to slaughter a cow to eat it, I probably wouldn't eat beef. When you get more closer to the reality of it, I think there's a lot of people who would hesitate or refuse to do that if they saw the actual suffering that happens. In Tantric ritual, for instance, the slaughter is done with a single stroke, where the head is taken off. So in that sense, it's relatively humane, not like this mass slaughter that's done in industrial food production in this country. And also it's done in a ritual context for a spiritual purpose, as opposed to just to satisfy the lust of your stomach, so to speak. So I mean, it's a whole different way of looking at things. But we live in a world, like, how many of us can have ritually slaughtered meat? I mean, if you eat kosher or halal or something, then you have that concept brought back in. It just depends on how important it is to you. Ultimately, it's not. It doesn't matter unless it matters to you. In which case, then do that.
We probably need to wrap it up.
Okay.
Burning question?
No, it's all right, thanks.
Are there announcements? Okay.
Hi, thank you so much, William, for coming, and thank you, Shantanu, for bringing William. This is the way that Sangha works, where members will tell us people I want to bring in. So if you have someone you'd like us to bring in, come see me. Who else is here in the program? Okay, Shantanu. And next week, I have to read this because I don't pronounce these names correctly. We have two people coming to speak, Bhavanti Klut and Ivan Parado, and their topic will be restorative justice and the Dharma. They're both teach meditation and business.
Young Paul, I just wanted to apologize for not showing up to host last Sunday, but I forgot. I apologize for that. I also, just an anecdote, I realized that last year I was hosting on Carnival Day, which was actually the fourth Sunday, which it was supposed to be. And I couldn't get into the city, you know, here I have my fruit and my cookies, and I just ran into all these barricades, and I just thought it was kind of interesting for me to remember that. Gotta remember that Carnival.
Hi. Hi. It's Carnival and Memorial Day weekend and newsletter mailing day today. So we have about 350 paper copies. About half go to prisoners, half to non-prisoners. And a few people in foreign places, like a prisoner in Central Africa and people in Singapore and France and Canada. So we all get together afterwards in about 20 minutes or so to help fold, stamp, staple, label, and put it all together. So can I see some hands? It's good if we have 8 or 10 people to help. Okay. That's good. Thank you.
I brought books. Gay Tantra. There. Yeah.
So is there, for us and for the people listening to the recording, are there any resources you can recommend? Do you have a website?
Yeah, it's www.gaytantra.org. And I have 5 copies of the book. If you'd like to get it, it's with sales tax, it's $20.
Do we have a host?
Yes, we do. There are cookies out there that are not vegan, and there are strawberries that are vegan. So. There's tea. We ask you to please wash your cup out with soapy water, rinse it, and put it back in the rack. When you're done, there's a sign-up sheet on the sideboard over here if you'd like to get our newsletter, and you can just check off the appropriate boxes. I'll be coming around reluctantly with the Donna Bowl. I hate this thing, but anyhow, this is how we keep the Sangha going. And as someone who also collects the mail and I get the thank you notes, when we have excess, we donate to other communities that are also supporting Buddhism and people in various ways. So your generosity flows from this Sangha out into the world. So as someone once said at a fundraising thing, that the suggested donation is $5 to $8, but my invitation is to don't give until it hurts, but give until it feels good. And I think that covers it.
This is a sign-up sheet.
And I can mention that.
Lunch.
Oh, and after we're done here, a group of people sometimes meet by the door. You go to lunch and you might be proactive, see someone floating around who looks a little shy, you might invite them to go to lunch with you, or not everybody, so be mindful of that and enjoy the day. It's gorgeous.
Would you like to read us a little closing?
Okay. Close with the chant.
Sure, whatever you like.
Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Filled with the divine are the things we see, filled with the divine are the things we see not. From out of the divine flows all that is, yet remains unchanged. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.